first subject is unlikely things to hear on the radio.
In the news this week, Oscar Brennan.
Club captain and legend now. I'm like, well, hold on a minute. He single-handedly got us relegated. Do I want to win to keep Shells in the league, or do I want to lose so that cunt gets sacked? That was a genuine, genuine thought that crossed our mind.
What's going on, guys, and welcome back to LOI Fan TV. In today's video we will be discussing Oscar Brennan. I never thought I'd be saying that, but however. As many of you will be aware, Oscar Brennan did appear on the One Up Top for the Tin Pot Club podcast, I think it's called, and yeah, let's just say it was quite, I think they described it in their own words as explosive. Is that the name of the podcast? Let me check really quickly, sorry. No, sorry, it's just the One Up Top podcast. Sorry, apologies. Right, my thoughts on the podcast. Yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it, yeah. Some parts more than others, naturally, but yeah, no, I thought it was enjoyable. In all seriousness, the lads podcast is very good. It's a very good LOI podcast. I don't listen to every episode as I'm not a Bows fan, so I wouldn't be listening to every single episode, but I have listened to some of them in the past, and the lads do have really good chemistry. You can tell by them that they have good chemistry, to get on well, and they get some really good guests on as well. I think they had Ross Tierney on it recently, so it's definitely one of the better podcasts in the LOI space. Obviously it's more kind of club specific, but yeah, for Bows fans it's a top class podcast, in fairness. I'm sure you probably have already, but if you haven't listened to it just yet, do go listen to the Oscar Brennan podcast. It's the latest one up at the moment. A really interesting listen and a good insight into LOI life, and it's not all Bows based as well, thank God. So yeah, definitely a worthwhile listen. And as always, if you do go on to enjoy the video, make sure to drop a like on it down below, and please do subscribe as well. Breaking down the podcast a little bit, he did start off kind of talking about his career at Bohemians, and it was interesting to kind of think back to that time at Bows and how different it was to the club it is now. He mentioned that the squad at the time was all kind of Dublin based, so the squad was very close in that regard, and of course now it's a completely different story, but yeah, back then all Dublin based lads, a really tight knit group. It was interesting to hear that point of view, that perspective, and to see how far they've come under Keith Long as well. An absolutely hilarious story as well, when Oscar Brennan was of course signing with Bows initially, meeting up with Keith Long to get his contract sorted, and Keith Long saying he couldn't because he'd hurt his back at Funderland, he'd slipped, he was with his kids and stuff like that, so he couldn't meet up with Oscar Brennan at the time. So yeah, no, it was such a funny story. Like, of course at the time as well, Ian Morris would have been a teammate of Oscar's at Bohemians. He ended up getting the manager gig down at Shells, Ian Morris, and he brought Oscar Brennan along with him. That does kind of imply that they must have got on well as teammates, and their relationship at that point would have been quite good. Oscar's first year with Shells, obviously in the first division with Ian Morris at the helm, obviously went really well, Oscar being a key part of the squad that earned promotion back to the top flight. So then it's interesting to fast forward to the next season, and at the end of the year Oscar Brennan's asking himself whether he wants to perform to keep the club in the division, or if he wants to not perform, maybe. I can't remember the exact words, but not put in a performance to get the manager sacked. A really interesting kind of shift in their relationship, so it seems. Some people would say, yeah, I respect his honesty, he's being honest about it all and how his feelings and stuff like that, but I think it's an absolutely deplorable thing to say, to be honest. You have to put your pride to one side and play for the badge, play for the historic club that's paying your wages. Another comment that did irk me that Oscar made during the podcast was saying that Luke Burns single-handedly relegated Shells that season. Probably it's a throwaway comment, but the biggest load of nonsense I've ever heard in my life. Picking up red cards, of course it's disappointing, and for the fans, for the players, for the management group, it's going to be disappointing, but it just highlights how difficult an environment it was at the time. Oscar said himself that the training was so toxic, everyone was on a knife edge ready to blow over, and I think Luke Byrne picking up red cards and having disciplinary issues is more an element of that and a reflection of that, and I think it highlights how much he cares and how much he was fighting for the club at the time when it was an absolute turmoil. He genuinely cared about what division Shelbourne were going to be playing in the following season, unlike a lot of players in that squad at the time. Luke Byrne, of course, still playing for Shells as captain today, playing week in week out in the Premier division. So yeah, take from that what you will. I do find that relationship with Ian Morris fascinating though, and it is something that I wish got delved into a little bit deeper on the podcast. I really wonder how it kind of developed over time, because they spent a lot of time together as teammates, and as that manager-player dynamic, did things kind of shift when Morris became that kind of superior. That manager-player dynamic, obviously in the first season worked really well. The second season it fell apart. I'd love to know more about where that relationship kind of slid, and like what kind of points along the way were significant in that relationship becoming so toxic in the end. I find that really, really fascinating, and hopefully something that we might maybe find out more in the future, because Oscar does seem quite open about his career, so we'll see what happens. Moving on to Oscar's time, of course, with Waterford and Bray. God, did he have a bad going to those two, in fairness. What a terrible way to end your LOI career with those two clubs. I think he did say he is retired now on the podcast, so yeah, what a terrible way to go out with Waterford and Bray, both clubs in absolute bits, an absolute shambles off the pitch, especially Bray this season as well. Really, really bad. So yeah, disappointing way to go out for him, I'd imagine. Surprised he is retiring as well, obviously 26 years of age. Obviously he could offer a lot more to a lot of clubs, maybe in the first division potentially, but yeah, interesting that he is retired. I think he said he's moving to Dubai as well with work and stuff. So yeah, listen, definitely what he thinks is the best move for himself. So but I think if he comes back to Ireland in a couple of years time, would he be open to joining the club? It's hard to know. Maybe he's burnt some bridges after this podcast, but yeah, we'll see. We'll just touch on Bray briefly though. He kind of mentioned, I think it was, that this is something I'd like to learn more about as well, if he is going to open up about it in terms of his time at Bray. Obviously Bray, an absolute joke, but interesting to hear kind of, I think he was saying he was the captain against Shamrock Rovers on the Saturday, trained the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then this is friendlies by the way, and in pre-season, and then was told he wasn't playing against Bows on the Friday in a friendly, and kind of, I don't know, maybe a bit harsh to say he threw his toys out of the pram, but wasn't happy with that decision. Didn't turn up for training, I think it was on the Saturday, and then it all boiled over then on the Monday, and then that was the end of his relationship with the club, and he got it sorted out then in terms of getting a payout or whatever. But yeah, it just felt a little bit kind of, it escalated really quickly, and I'd like to hear kind of both sides of the story to get a full picture of what happened there. I think he did mention he could have kind of approached it differently. He could have maybe rang someone about it before the Bows game and trying to find the reason for why he wasn't involved, something like that. Maybe he could have done more to stop it from escalating to such a degree. But yeah, a really, really interesting one. It sounds a little bit maybe childish to a degree, to have it kind of escalate to that level and to get out of hand so quickly over something kind of pre-season friendly. Like it's a strange one. I'd like to kind of know more about that, but obviously knowing what's going on at Bray behind the scenes this season, and just a little glimpse we've had, you kind of know that, yeah, you wouldn't discredit anything Oscar's saying, let's just say that. But I would like to hear a little bit more on that and how that kind of came to a head. All in all, as I said, I did really, really enjoy the podcast. To be fair, it was really, really good listen. As hosts of a podcast, all you can really ask from your guests is to be open and honest about their experiences, and in fairness, Oscar Brennan certainly was. He does seem like a decent fella overall, I think, and doesn't take any shite, and he's very straight up, I think, which is definitely a commendable characteristic. Just maybe a little bit at times, it sounded a little bit like he's a bit stubborn at times maybe, and maybe a little bit immature at times in some of his dealings and things like that. But yeah, that's life, I suppose, and football's a very emotional game as well, as we all know. You'd like to get both sides of the story and a lot of the stuff he was saying, I think. But yeah, definitely a really, really interesting listen and a good insight into LOI life. But yeah, sure, that's just my opinion on the podcast anyway, from what I heard. As I said, if you haven't already, make sure to go over and give it a listen. It is really, really worthwhile. And let me know what you thought of it down in the comments below. If you did enjoy this video, please drop a like on it and make sure to subscribe as well. Thanks a million for tuning in, guys, and I'll catch you in a little bit.